Welcome to My on Mondays, an explorative approach to the possessive my through narratives, art, and sound. Each Monday brings a new creation and unique perspective. My on Mondays is brought to you by MING Studios, a contemporary art space and international artist residency program dedicated to the exhibition, experience, and exploration of arts and culture. Along with exhibiting artists from around the world, MING also serves the community by hosting innovative programs including performances, workshops, screenings, readings, artist talks, and other cultural activities. For more information, or if you'd like to participate in My on Mondays, you can visit our website at mingstudios.org. Hello and welcome to the 80th episode of My on Mondays. Today I'm really pleased to share this conversation with cellist Jake Saunders. As a performer, curator, educator, artistic director, and new music advocate, Saunders engages diverse communities through inclusive programming and distinctive collaboration. He's a founding member and artistic director of 208 Ensemble, the first professional ensemble in Boise, Idaho, dedicated to the advocacy and performance of music written by living composers. Since their inception in 2014, 208 Ensemble has presented more than 40 contemporary works to diverse and enthusiastic audiences. In 2018, they introduced their flagship project, Avant-Garden, designed to commission chamber music annually from emerging and underrepresented composers and cultivate an accessible, collaborative environment for the performance of contemporary art. Additionally, Saunders is the creator of Boise Cello Collective, a collaborative project specializing in the performance of classical, contemporary, and popular music in non-traditional venues. Saunders has been principal cellist of Symphony Tacoma, Opera Idaho Orchestra, Boise State University Symphony Orchestra, University of Michigan Symphony Orchestra and Philharmonia Orchestra, the Music Academy of the West Festival Orchestra, the University of Colorado Boulder Symphony Orchestra, as well as performing with a variety of other groups. He currently serves as Associate Principal Cello with the Boise Philharmonic, where he also serves as a member of the Boise Philharmonic String Quartet. He's section cellist with the Long Beach Symphony Orchestra in California, and as an active member of the Playground Ensemble and Sphere Ensemble, Saunders has established himself as a sought-after collaborative artist in Colorado, including projects such as Boulder Altitude Directive, Boulder Symphony, and Pro Musica Chamber Orchestra. I really like it when I hear that people in the classical traditions, whether it be dance or music or whatever, are doing something that's different. Mm-hmm. And so you are the founder of two groups. The 208 Ensemble, which I'm going to quote your websites, is a multi-instrumental ensemble specializing in the performance of innovative chamber music dedicated to the advocacy and performance of music written by living composers. And then Yes. You also are part of the Boise Cello Collective, which specializes in the performance of classical, contemporary, and popular music in non-traditional venues. So, I mean, you're really you seem like you have a lot of focus on doing something that is different from what you would typically see in a classical performance. And so I'm curious what got you started in that direction.
Absolutely. I think a lot of what my answer will be with how I got started is kind of based in the practical realm. I've always been pretty active in terms of creating things and leading projects, and it's something I do without even really intentionally thinking about it. It's just one of my it just comes naturally to me. And I guess I'll start with Boise Cello Collective because that was the group I started first. All the way back in 2012, I think. So it's been around for a minute. And that was when I had just moved back to Boise from my first college degree experience. And was just wanting to be involved in the community a bit more actively. I didn't have any, hired, contracted, institutionalized performance opportunity at that time. I was pretty young. And so I basically contacted some friends of mine and said, hey, how would you feel about getting together, playing some cello quartets on street corners downtown? And people were interested. And that's how that group started. And very quickly, I realized that, four cellos is somewhat of a unique combination of instruments. It's once we're doing it and we're performing, it seems like perfect. Like, why isn't this more of a thing? But there is not as much precedent as, say, like with traditional string quartet with violins and viola and so forth. And so that evolved into me making original arrangements for the group very quickly, just so that we would have material to play on the street. And from there, the group evolved into something a little bit more focused and serious, where we were a codified ensemble and we had set membership, and we were touring and playing in, both these non-traditional venues, but also concert halls. And the group has sort of developed from there. And so it's really coming from, like, that's the roots of that ensemble is busking, just pick up performances, pop-up performances downtown, wherever we could find a place that sounded reasonably good and that people would be walking by. And I found some of my most enjoyable and satisfying performance experiences were those where, people are really not expecting to hear live music as they're walking downtown necessarily, and especially not a cello quartet. And so what I found is that the audiences we developed were by definition organic. And if people chose to stop and listen, it was purely because they wanted to, or they found something attractive about what we're doing. And that was a pretty liberating experience. And I realized that there's an interest in that sort of thing of crossover, what you typically associate with classical instruments, crossing over into different genres. People love hearing their favorite Beatles song played by cellos, for example. And so it was a little bit less about what my personal passion was and more about, I want to do something, and hey, I'm realizing that our community is responding pretty well to this thing, so let's keep going. And then a couple of years later, I had finished a graduate degree at Boise State, and I'm from Boise. I grew up here, and there's a very common mindset among those of us who are from here, especially artists, I would venture to say, in which we grew up here, we're from here, and we tell ourselves that once we go to college or whatever else, we are never coming back. And I was definitely one of those people. And so I somewhat reluctantly came back to Boise for a graduate degree. It was just on paper a wonderful opportunity, and I couldn't say no to it. That's a different story. But in the process of that 2-year program, I realized that I really love this community, and there's a lot here. There's a lot, that's being offered, and there's also a lot of room to grow. And I think it was because of that 2-year experience of it, just being very welcomed and very supported, that I made a very active decision. Instead of, going off and trying to find the next big city or applying to other schools in big cities, etc. I remember the day where I made the very active decision of, like, I want to keep doing this. I want to keep being here, contributing to the growing arts community in Boise, giving back to the community that's given me so much, to develop my own artistic career. And then the question was, okay, so what am I going to do? What do we not have in Boise? We have a symphony orchestra, we have ballet, we have opera, we have all these other things that are in a certain way thriving. So what do we not have? And it was from that question that 208 Ensemble came to be, just from the realization that we don't have any ensemble organization in town that's specifically dedicated to music of our time, composers who are working today. And so I connected with a composer who had just picked up a job at Boise State, and I asked if he would be interested in forming this ensemble with me. His name's David Bienenbender, and we went forth and did that. And that really was to fill a specific niche that I thought was overlooked here in Boise. I did have some experience playing contemporary repertoire in some of my school careers, background, and I had found a lot of interest, and I also found a sense of identity with that. The feeling like you are kind of carving out new space, and that there is room for you in that space, because what you don't have with contemporary music is hundreds of years of tradition and precedent. And so you have some of that, but you also have so much more room to be an interpreter and really explore it in your own way, not to mention engage with the composers themselves and um, feel like you are really part of the continuation of a very long traditional art form. It really is, these composers are not only listening to Bach and Beethoven, but Beyonce and the Beatles and living artists and so forth. And so it's the phrase I would often use with this group is it's innovative and fresh, but also comforting and familiar in a certain way. And so I had that experience and thought that Boise might be ready for that based on some of the experience I had with the Cello Collective, where there seemed like a real interest and kind of desire for chamber music, but specifically a chamber ensemble that was doing something a bit different. Yeah. And so that's how that group developed and grew. And it's still around today. It's things are challenging. It's sort of taken a little bit of a back burner role in my life for a variety of reasons. But to answer that question directly, I think both are coming from my interest to contribute something tangible to this community and help move it in a certain direction, help its growth, help its development through these projects, through the creation of new ensembles.
Yeah. Well, that kind of leads me into one of my other questions. So, something that most artists experience is that it's really hard to make a living as an artist or a musician. And you talk about not necessarily having the time that you need to devote to certain projects. And can you tell us a little bit more about the various projects that you're doing and how you make it all work?
Yes, that is a major challenge, and it's very true that it's difficult for every medium. I'm going to focus on what I know, which is music and classical music in particular. But I do think there's probably crossover to other traditions where, we're coming from an academic perspective or a traditional perspective where success is defined by X, Y, or Z opportunities. And if you don't reach those opportunities, then there's nothing for you. And so that's kind of the mindset that I grew up with. And the X, Y, or Z that I'm talking about are employment with a full-time orchestra, position at a full-time university, or winning a bunch of competitions and becoming a soloist.
Yeah.
And all three of those, like numerically speaking, are kind of equivalent to winning the Olympics. It's possible, and people definitely do it, but the chances of you being eligible, not only in a musical technical sense, but also in a political, not to mention socioeconomic sense, are pretty tricky. And I think that's where that limiting mindset comes from, where if you're not doing those things, then therefore you're not going to be able to make ends meet. My perspective and the way that I see the culture developing now is a little bit more along the lines of art is something that everybody wants and, dare I say, needs, and there's room for everybody to contribute in that way. And if you're willing to be flexible and creative and do work that you may not have dreamed of or aspired to when you were younger, then I think you'll be able to make it. And so what I'm currently up to, I have sort of a complicated life because I am based currently in 3 states, Boise, Denver, and also Long Beach, California. And I have multiple performance jobs that I have in all 3 locations. I play with Long Beach Symphony down in California. In Boise, I play with Boise Phil, Opera Idaho, 208 Ensemble, Boise Cello Collective. I also teach here quite a lot. I have something like 22 private students here now. And in Denver, I work with a contemporary ensemble called Playground Ensemble, as well as a pretty unique string group called Sphere Ensemble that kind of does what Boise Cello Collective does, which is crossing over into pop and other genres, but in a string orchestra setting. And so that's kind of the portfolio of what I do. And that also doesn't include any number of freelance things that I have either built for myself or have picked up. So for example, more recently, I've been enjoying playing, it's improvised music for yin yoga sessions in different studios throughout Boise.
Oh, wow.
And,
nice.
That's been a really rewarding experience for me and something that's very new. I go in there and I'm really truly improvising, but for an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, and that's its own set of challenges. But um, again, I think it's in the mindset of that if you're open to it and you can imagine where you can see music sort of fitting in the cracks, then you can
Yeah.
make those opportunities happen for yourself.
No, that's
Um,
so fantastic. Yeah.
yeah, so there's the portfolio. It's a mix of actual employment, so being hired by organizations. It's also freelance performance work, so yoga and weddings, playing other events. It's also teaching. I write a lot of grants. I do a lot of admin
Mm.
work, and so um, I'm pretty busy most of the time doing a lot of this stuff. And
Sounds
so
like it. Yeah.
it's
It's
all
a lot.
performance related. I think teaching is sort of a separate category, which I also love a lot. But
Mm-hmm.
that's the portfolio, and through that, I'm not getting rich, but I am stable, and
Yeah.
I think importantly, I really enjoy almost everything that I do very much, if that makes sense. Like there's nothing that
That
I
says a lot. Yeah.
yeah, there's nothing that I like wake up and I'm like, I have to do this. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we all have our moments, but in general, I'm like, I get to do this. I'm excited about this,
Yeah.
and I feel very grateful for that. But I do think it comes from that flexible mindset of, it'd be nice if I had just one job that was paying the bills, but realistically, that's not. I don't know if that's going to happen. It could, but
Mm-hmm.
in the meantime, what am I going to do? And so, making yourself open to any number of things, and uh, I think alongside that, there's a lot to be said for how do I say this in an elegant way that with that institutionalized mindset of success means X, Y, or Z, comes a bit of an ego where the people who are occupying those roles, we
Mm-hmm.
look up to them, and those are the leaders of the field, so to speak. And if you're not doing that, then therefore by default you're not as good. And I think that's
Yeah.
a very old-fashioned and not helpful mindset, because
Yeah.
everybody has something to offer, and it's just matching, going back to the community need that I was feeling. It's that classic thing of matching your skill set with the what the community needs and wants, and then you ask yourself, what do I do to find the middle ground of where my skill set meets that demand, and
Yeah.
through that, I think, yeah, a
I
lot of
think
things are possible.
that's such a great way to look at it because I mean I myself have been really um kind of not turned off necessarily, but less focused on sort of performance as this separate thing where you're the performer and the audience is another thing, and really trying to figure out where I want to be and in what ways I can connect with the community in a way that
Mhm.
feels more meaningful to me. So I really relate personally with a lot of
Yeah,
what you're saying.
absolutely. And a lot of with the contemporary music thing, that was a difficult thing at first, because we're introducing an art form to a community that really has no experience with it. And I don't say that in a condescending way. I think it's just a matter of fact. Like, if you don't have people playing that music, then you may have access to recordings, or if you visit other cities, etc. But for the most part, it was sort of a new experience. And so the way that we packaged that was much more in terms of the connectivity, emotional experience of,
Mm-hmm.
we're choosing to play repertoire that's meaningful to us, that we truly
Yeah.
love, and we are hoping that our audiences will be able to respond to that primarily. That's where we're hitting them in their feelings. Like, it's
Yeah,
more about that
totally.
emotional connection, and
Yeah.
maybe later the conceptual understanding of the art form will come, but it's almost unnecessary. It's um, yeah, I think connecting through that emotional lens, like, we love this, you're connecting to our love of it, and so therefore you're going to enjoy it too.
Yeah, totally. And so one of my other questions was because you are performing in this way that's different or in non-traditional venues, I'm really curious what maybe one or two of the most unique experiences are that you've had, or something that is there anything that stands out in your mind that was either, I don't know, maybe it could even be funny, but something that stands out to you.
Yeah, well, I will say the street performance stuff is definitely in that category, but I've already touched on that. So
Yeah.
maybe a different story. A few years ago, I went on a tour with a kind of Americana singer-songwriter type artist, and she had assembled an instrumental band to support her. And it was a tour based in northern Germany, a city called Bremen, and a really kind of, I think, beautiful concept for a tour, which is we were working with this company whose whole mission was to insert live music into spaces that otherwise would never have live music. And so that meant
Okay.
a lot of like, sometimes a lot of like very small venues. We did a lot of house shows. We played in
Mhm.
cafes, things you really wouldn't think of, like walking into this place and there's, this folk band from America, from the United States performing.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the standout experiences from that, we were in that primary city. We were in Bremen, and we were tasked to play. We were hired to play at this restaurant so that city is right on the coast. It's up on the northern sea there, whatever that's called. And the communities there have been fishermen for generations, hundreds of years probably, if not more.
Mhm.
And we were playing at this old like fisherman's cafe. And if you can basically picture like a mobile home that's been converted into a very low key cafe, that's what the space was. And
Wow.
sorry, what was that?
No, I'm trying to imagine that.
Yeah, really just like not fancy is the point, just very
Uh-huh.
basic.
Yeah.
Um, utilitarian. You walk in to the restaurant, they ask you two questions. Do you want food? Yes or no. Do you want beer? Yes or no. And you eat whatever they're cooking that day and whatever they have on tap. It's
Okay.
very like homey in that certain way. And the people who are there, older but very like working type people, you can tell they've spent a lot of their lives working on boats and at the docks and so forth, and so kind of intense. And they're Germans, so there's like a certain intensity and
Mm.
seriousness,
Mhm.
like at risk of cliche, but it's also kind of true. Um,
Yeah.
and here we are, we're like, again, Americans, we're playing folk music, and we are all completely nervous. Like, this is a slightly older audience that we're used to. Not that that's a problem in the slightest, but that's a difference between us as performers. And they're also workers, and we have no idea if they're interested in hearing our music whatsoever.
Yeah, so
And
you didn't know how you'd be received.
exactly,
Yeah.
we couldn't communicate. They spoke very little English. We spoke almost no German. And, we get up to play and it's completely silent. It's a very serious, somber atmosphere, almost like what you'd expect from like a traditional classical music environment. Not to
Mhm.
be negative about that, but
Mhm.
that kind of atmosphere. And we start playing our songs, and what we realize very quickly is that this is one of the most enthusiastic audiences we've ever played for.
Oh, wow.
They were so deeply appreciative of like every single song we played, and they clapped like vigorously and excitedly and like with the
Oh.
most like stern expressions on their face, but you could tell that they were just so grateful and
Wow.
apparently loving what we were doing.
Yeah.
And so it completely evolved from something that felt, I guess I'll say a bit cold, or we
Mhm.
didn't know if we were going to be welcome there,
Yeah,
to actually,
intimidating, it sounds like.
yes, that's a good
Yeah.
word for it, I would say. Like we were out of our element basically,
Yeah.
and we were prepared to be embarrassed, and this was going to be a low point in the tour, but ended up being one of the best times. And we connected with so many of those people, not only through the music, but after the show, just, people taking time to, and also a risk to come communicate with us, again with very few English words, and just to say thank you. And so that was a
Wow.
very meaningful experience. It's definitely a non-traditional venue. It's
Yeah.
just a kind of a rundown cafe by the sea with a bunch of like ship workers and dock workers, and uh, yeah, I'll remember that forever, just because it was such a transformation of expectation.
That
And
just sounds, yeah, it sounds like a really powerful experience.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Wow. So, um, you talk about being out of your element, and so I'm curious, when you are in your element, aside from what you are doing yourself, what are you most excited about in the music world right now? What's
Yes,
been sort of at the top of
I
your
like this question partially because it's so much easier to talk about the things we wish were going better or that we're not happy about or excited about.
mm,
Um, I think one thing that definitely stands out is that in the past couple years, there's a lot of work left to do, but there's a real shift, and people are talking about this and actively working towards towards breaking free from the canon, which is very conspicuously rooted in white supremacist art and
mm-hmm.
like dominant culture. And you know, I'm not saying that we're there yet by any means, but people are at least talking about it. And
Yeah.
not only grassroots organizations, but from the top down, actually just yesterday, the Metropolitan Opera published its next 5-year performance schedule. And we're talking about one of the most conservative institutions in the world, if
Yeah.
really, like
Totally.
they have a terrible track record of performing opera by women, composers of color, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And they just published their 5-year plan, which includes 17 contemporary operas by all kinds of composers. And
Wow.
I'm not here to say that the Met is like this, incredible organization that's doing all the right things, but
Mm-hmm.
that is an example of a top of the field organization starting to move in a certain direction that is including more voices.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's an incredibly wise investment also because if we're talking about generating new audiences, how do you do that? I think you have to, perform work by composers that people connect with
Mm-hmm.
and, sounds that people are relevant to life in 21st century. And so that's one example. And aside from political connotations and the social justice that comes alongside with that, it's very exciting because what we're doing is just exploring other incredible music that's been very systemically ignored
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah.
And so, just that sort of awakening and that step in that direction. And I want to be very clear that we're not even close to being where at the point that we should be, but
Mm-hmm.
at least some conversations are happening, some organizations are moving that way, and there's momentum, at least as far as I can tell, from institutions, financial support, et cetera. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I find that inspiring, and it's definitely it's directing my own work moving forward very, very, very actively.
Yeah. I love how you make the point. Not only is it, socially and culturally such an important step forward, but just the simple fact that, oh, we get to hear this music now. That's
Yes.
really, it's, excuse me, that's really exciting and inspiring, to just think
Yeah,
about how much it's going to change our way of experiencing the world.
absolutely. One of the kind of cliche questions that comes up a lot is, should we be performing music by Wagner? Wagner was an outspoken anti-Semite, and his music was used by the Nazis to support their propaganda and so
Mm,
forth. And so the question is, sure, this might be, aesthetically, artistically of high value, but can we support the person behind the art? That's a very complex discussion, but one answer that I think that goes overlooked is that, well, let's say that you do. Let's say that we do exclude this music from performances. Then the byproduct is that you have all that extra bandwidth to explore other stuff.
yeah.
There's time on concert programs or in opera schedules. There's maybe an interest to find something new, and
Mm-hmm.
so I find that it's like it almost doesn't sidestep the question of morality, but it is like here's another way of looking at that. If we don't insist on playing this particular kind of music, then it does open the door and resources to explore other things, which should be
Totally.
explored no matter what.
Yeah,
And yeah,
absolutely. Wonderful. So you, the Boise Cello Collective is going to be performing at MING soon.
yes,
And so I'd love to hear about what you're planning for that performance to get the audience excited about what's coming.
yes. Well, I am very excited. I've missed playing at Ming Studios. Maybe you remember feel like I've been there a lot. I feel like it's kind of a second home.
Mm.
Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I think I still have a key to the door.
That's great.
I'll give it back, I promise. But anyway, I've had some of my best experiences at MING, and so
that's so great to hear.
yeah, and so I'm building this set with MING in mind, and what I'm thinking of is it's a very intimate space. It's resonant. People are going to sit close, and so I'm designing the set with that in mind. What kind of music that is going to sound amazing with four cellos, but is also going to allow for very immediate connectivity with audiences in that intimate space. Or another way of saying that, like, what kind of music is going to lend itself to that?
Yeah.
And so, in a more tangible reference point, we're playing several new works specifically written for cello quartet by a handful of really outstanding living composers.
Wonderful.
There is a handful of my own original arrangements, and for that, it's mostly music that I'm really attracted to and want to share with people. And then there's another category of music that you just may not expect for cellists to be able to cover and have it be effective. And so, for example, hearing Radiohead on cello is, I think, pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And what happens when you perform music that is based on lyrics and there are no lyrics involved. And so, but really I'm thinking about the space itself and what's going to create this ambiance of connectivity and intimacy, which MING already engenders, like it's already built in. So how can we contribute to that?
Oh, well, I'm so glad that you feel that way. And I'm really looking forward to the performance. So thank you so much for talking with me today. And I really encourage everyone to come down to your performance. Remind me of the date because I don't have my schedule in front of me.
That is May the 21st.
May the 21st. Perfect.
Sunday. Let me triple check that because we have several concerts around that same time.
I'll maybe
May
instead
21st.
It's May
7
21st.
o'clock.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks again. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us, and looking very much forward to your performance.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you so much for including me, and look forward to May 21st.
All right, take care.
All right, you as well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be back next Monday. Tune in.